Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to look at something pretty simple. We're going to look at pronouns in Semitic languages, and I've just selected Akkadian, Aramaic, Arabic, and Hebrew in order to talk about something called language geography. In other words, well, where do we live, and how does our neighborhood impact our speech? The nice thing about Semitic languages is that they're so similar, and you can kind of see where geographically points of divergence happen. If you don't know pronouns in any Semitic language, consider this an introduction. If you've learned pronouns in one of these languages, well, now you get a chance to see them across the board. So I included Biblical Aramaic and Syriac just because many people who start studying Aramaic, they may start with Biblical Aramaic, others may start with Syriac. And this will give you an idea of sort of how the languages play out and how dialects in these languages manifest in their written forms. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start, and I'm going to read from left to right. I've included the spelling in the characters from the language, the way it's used, alongside the Latin transliteration, because I can't expect everybody to read all these different writing systems. And really, the Biblical Aramaic and Hebrew use the same characters. Syriac and Arabic are basically the same characters, just modified, with a different writing font. You could say Syriac is the same alphabet as Aramaic, Biblical Aramaic and Hebrew are. Syriac is just the same alphabet as Biblical Aramaic and Hebrew, and Arabic is derived from that. It has a number of other letters represented in that language writing system, but it's effectively the same. It's not quite the same. It does develop more letters and different ways of writing them. I'm going to begin from the left, and I'm just going to read down the line. So, ana, anta, ant, hu, he, anachna, antun, himo, himon, inun, inin. Now, the Syriac, I'm going to read two ways. I've written it in the general way that it's transcribed into Latin characters. I'll begin with the West Syriac accent, and then I'll read it in the East Syriac accent. The characters, the diacritic marks, actually, on the Syriac writing are found more commonly in the East than they are in the West. However, they produce the same sort of vocalization depending on whether you're in the West or the East. Eno, at, hu, he, hnan, atun, aten, henun, henen. Now, in the East accent, eno, at, hu, he, chnan, aton, aten, henon, henen. Now, Arabic, ana, anta, anti, huwa, hiya, nahnu, antum, antunna, hum, hunna. Hebrew, we've got two for the word I, the first common singular pronoun. Anochi, ani. Ata, at. Hu, he. Anu, anachnu. Atem, aten. Hem, hen. And finally, Akkadian, anaku, ata, ati, shu, she, ninu, atunu, atina, shunu, shina. If you want to come back to the screen, take a screen grab of it, print it out, or you can email me and I will send you one. If you prefer just looking at the way pronouns are written in their respective languages, you can look at this sheet instead. Feel free to pause it, write it down by hand, making your own charts. I always write things by hand for memory purposes. If you want, you can also take a screen grab and print this out. So now we're going to go through the list and just look at some of the unique features of it. I mean, one thing you probably noticed is in the first common singular, that is to say, I, Hebrew and Akkadian have this older feature with this K on the end, or a cup. And so Akkadian is Anaku, but Hebrew is Anochi. So we don't see that by the time that Syriac, Arabic, Biblical Aramaic are written down. We do have a shortened form in Hebrew, Ani. In fact, most of the time, modern speakers of Hebrew are going to say Ani, and no one's going to say Anochi. That's Biblical Hebrew. But it's interesting. I mean, this way of saying I is pretty prevalent in the ancient world. I mean, Phoenician does something similar, Aniki. Now, for the first common plural, you'll notice the Syriac is Hnan, which is a metathesized form of Nahna or Nahnu or Anahnu or even Nino in Akkadian, presumably the emphatic he or the emphatic h or the het, as it's known, exists in the Akkadian, but you can't write it using Akkadian characters. So you write Nino, and it's quite possible that it stopped being pronounced. That's hard to say, if and when that happened or where it would have happened. It may not be universally so geographically, but we do know that Syriac metathesizes the hath and nun. So instead of having nun, hath, nun, sort of as the root, the way the other languages have it, we have hath, nun, nun, Hnan. Now here's something a little more fun. If you look at the way in which the different languages utilize the second person pronouns, whether it's masculine singular, masculine plural, or feminine plural, there is this nun that's in there historically. And in fact, in Biblical Aramaic and in Arabic, they're still vocalized, right? You have anta, antur, anti. You have antun and antum or antuna. So now you may notice there's a blank spot in Biblical Aramaic for the second feminine plural you that's there in the rest. That's just because it's not attested in the Aramaic of the Bible. That means the book of Daniel and Ezra, basically. So it's blank, but it's probably something like antein. And then you'll see when comparing Syriac, Hebrew, and Akkadian together, this nun assimilates to the tau that follows, or the tav, as is commonly pronounced in Hebrew, so that you have at or ata, at, ati, atun, atem, atunu, aten, atina. But there is one interesting thing about the Syriac. If you notice the Syriac, the way it's written is marked in red, meaning it's still written with the nun, but you see this dash above on top, and sometimes it'll be an underline beneath a letter that indicates the letter's silent and not pronounced. So Syriac maintains the way it's spelled, but the Syriac does not pronounce the nun in the second person pronouns, whether they be masculine, feminine, singular, or plural. Well, we can also look at the end feature. Arabic and Hebrew share a mim at the end of their second masculine plural, whereas the other pronouns attest to a nun or an end sound at the end of theirs. Atun, aton, antum, atem, atunu. Pretty interesting the way that plays out. And it makes us wonder, how are these used across the geographical boundaries? Now, first, I'm using a map that uses the names of the places just so you can kind of calibrate with your eyes where these areas would be on a map today. I think it's a little easier to look at them this way. The gold on the bottom is the historical boundary of Arabic, and that may extend a little north just a tad. These maps get a little more nuanced as time goes on. In fact, the blue on the left, it's really marking out sort of where Canaanite dialects are, and Hebrew is the southernmost of the Canaanite dialects. So as you go more north, you're going to encounter coastal Canaanite, things we call Phoenician or Ugaritic, stuff like that. The light purple in the middle is the range of Aramaic, and Aramaic is sort of when you go inland into Syria and into the desert regions. It does go across to the north across the Euphrates into historic Mesopotamia, and it also extends down, especially in later periods. And it also extends down into Mesopotamia. In fact, we could do this diachronically over time, just showing the growth of the different languages and how they overlap with one another. The red on the right is the historical range of Akkadian, but let's be honest, Akkadian's written in places far away from Mesopotamia. And in fact, one of the most interesting archives of Akkadian texts comes from Egypt, Tel El Amarna. So this map is just to kind of calibrate, where they were traditionally, and it's not a hard and fast rule. So try not to get worked up in case, you're feeling some inner stress and anxiety here because one of the borders went a little too far or not far enough. And as we look at the second person pronouns, you can kind of see where they connect and where they don't, where they're similar and where they aren't, and what may be influencing another. The Aramaics, the top left portion is going to be Syriac, and the bottom right portion is going to be Biblical Aramaic. Of course, your Akkadian is going to be in the red, your Hebrew is going to be in the blue, your Arabic is going to be in the gold. We also have a similarity with the word for he, the third masculine singular pronoun. It's basically who everywhere except for Arabic huwa. Huwa is probably historically accurate. The way you look at the way Biblical Aramaic and Hebrew are spelled, they have an aleph at the end. Maybe it's huwa, with a historical glottal stop at the end. Not quite sure about that, but, why not? It might be the case. Arabic doesn't have the aleph at the end. It just has its tanween, indicating how to pronounce it, and it's spelled the same way Syriac is spelled. You also notice in Akkadian, you don't have an H, you have a sh sound. So shu is your Akkadian for the third person. Shu instead of who. So just look at that a little more clearly. It's who pretty much everywhere, except for huwa in Arabic and shu in Akkadian. The sh eventually becomes a h sound over time. Presumably the sh becomes a h over time. And, we do that through a process called historical linguistics, and how sounds are known to change over time. Like, what are the common human habits for sound change? It doesn't necessarily mean that's the case, but it's probably the case that it started as sh. In fact, people who would reconstruct Proto-Semitic might, they might say Shua was the original form of the word he. Now we look similarly at the third person masculine plurals. We see Arabic and Hebrew also have the ending with a mim, an M sound, and the Aramaic languages, Syriac and Biblical Aramaic, along with Akkadian, have this nun at the end, or nun, u, or vav, or wow, however you want to articulate the letter, and then another nun. Now, Akkadian doesn't have the final, it's not shunun, but we do have inun, himun, henun, and shunu. So there is the N versus M, the nun versus mim going on here. And you can kind of look at it this way as it's articulated geographically. And you can kind of see who borders who and how that impacts maybe the way people pronounce things when they speak. So it's a simple conversation. Pronouns are one of the first things you learn when you learn language. Maybe you've done Arabic and you haven't done any of these others. Maybe you've done Hebrew and you haven't done any of these others. Maybe you've done Syriac and you haven't done any of these other languages. If so, well, welcome to the club for the other dialects. I hope it's empowering and makes you feel like, hey, you know stuff in a bunch of languages now. The nice thing about Semitic languages, and really, any language family, I suppose, but it's really fun with Semitic languages, is that there's so much similarity that you just sort of have to know how things change between the language, and then you can start grasping materials you wouldn't have been able to before, you wouldn't have thought to, because you've classified it in your head as a different language. So if you like this video, feel free to share it. Thank you all for liking and providing your questions and comments below. Come back again for more language fun.